Hello, my name is Mr. Chipman, and I teach biology and AP biology at Murray High School in Murray, Kentucky. This is Unit 3, Cellular Energetics, 3.3 Cellular Energy. This is sort of the intro to photosynthesis, cellular respiration, before we get in the weeds on those two reactions. On those reactions, I'll be spending 2 videos each, photosynthesis 1 and 2, cellular respiration 1 and 2, because there's a lot, and I want to kind of break it up, give you a chance to digest it. So let's talk about energy. Energy is essential to life. Energy is typically talked about in sort of an abstract form, right? There's different units for energy. We're not going to really talk about that, but energy is necessary for organisms to survive, to grow, to reproduce, and it's used for lots of different things. We've talked about lots of different things over the course of this year already that it's used for. Make molecules, active transport, to move. We're going to talk about cellular division and repair in Unit 4. So energy is necessary for a lot of functions. In order to really understand energy, we have to understand thermodynamics. So living systems maintain highly ordered structures, right, in order to sort of keep things normal, because there is a universal tendency toward disorder. This concept of disorder is called entropy, which is basically the second law of thermodynamics. Second law of thermodynamics says that in all reactions, in all chemical reactions, there's some energy that's lost. There's some amount of order and structure that is lost, and that loss is called entropy. Typically, it's lost as heat, which is just unusable energy. Usable energy is very ordered, whereas unusable energy tends to be more disordered. Very ordered energy would be like sunlight, very, very good. Disordered energy would be like heat energy, very, very diffuse, very unusable. All right, and any kind of chemical reaction, whether it is digesting food, whether it's building molecules, whether it's the sun just shining down on the earth onto the wheat plant that the rabbit's going to eat, in each one of those energy exchanges, there is a loss of energy due to entropy, right? That is the idea here. The first law of thermodynamics, I guess, is important to talk about too, that energy is neither created or destroyed. We talked about the fact that enzymes don't bring energy, or they don't create energy. So we're not creating more energy. There's a finite amount of energy in the universe, and a little bit of that energy is being lost, or not really lost, but changed into a very disordered type of energy with every single interaction. So the universe is eventually just going to be a big pile of heat. Sometimes you'll see it called the heat death of the universe. It's a long time from now. So you don't have to worry with that or anything. And that brings us to this idea of energy coupling. There are some chemical reactions that are coupled, meaning that they are tied together, right? That they are sort of linked, right? And photosynthesis and cellular respiration are 2 such interactions. You can even see this as you look at their products and their reactants. The products of photosynthesis, which are glucose and oxygen, they're on the right, are the reactants for cellular respiration. So in order to do cellular respiration, you need glucose and oxygen. And when you do cellular respiration, you produce CO2 and H2O. CO2 and H2O just happen to be the reactants for photosynthesis. You can see this. You can read as well as I can. Well, light is being put into this reaction, right? And so light is very good energy. It's being captured by the chloroplasts in plant cells in order to do this reaction. Well, when mitochondria in both plant and animal cells, and whatever cells have mitochondria, do this reaction, they are able to get some of that energy that was put in originally back out as chemical energy, right? And you have this continued coupling going on. And you can see that chemical energy is being as ATP. We talked about ATP being the energy currency of the cell. We're going to talk about a lot more about ATP over the next 2 videos. But these are coupled reactions because they kind of use each other. Now, this is not an infinite coupling, right? You can't just put a little bit of energy in and watch it spin. That'd be nice. But you can't do that because of entropy, right? Every one of these cycles, a little bit of energy is lost and made into unusable energy. Here's another example of an energy-coupled reaction. This is ATP hydrolysis. So you have ATP there at the top. It's called ATP because it's an adenosine, which is a nitrogenous base, with 3 phosphates. So ATP is an example of a nucleotide. You have a ribose, you have a adenosine, and then you have 3 phosphates instead of 1. Those phosphates don't like each other, right? They're negatively charged, they don't like each other, and it takes energy to get them together. But if you can get them together and you can snap off one of those phosphates, that is an energy release. It's a reaction that can release some energy, create free energy to do some sort of cellular work, right? And you see that in this picture, right? And it's called ATP hydrolysis because it requires water to do that. And converting from ATP to ADP in a phosphate releases energy. Anytime you flex a muscle, anytime you do any sort of active transport, this is what's happening. Well, to get that phosphate stuck back onto that ADP then is going to require some energy. Where do you get the energy for that? We get it from food. That's where we get it from, right? And so that energy that's from food, we take food apart, get the energy out, and we put ADP and phosphate back together. And this keeps redoing itself. And so we need to keep feeding the engine, right, with more food. And every one of those reactions is losing a little bit of energy due to entropy. You get the idea. This is an example of a conserved pathway. And not just in when I say this whole idea of coupled reactions is conserved, but specifically photosynthesis, cellular respiration, ATP hydrolysis. These are all conserved pathways. What a conserved pathway is these are pathways that organisms have been using since there were first organisms, right? Prokaryotic organisms, very primitive organisms, use these pathways to the most complex organisms like ourselves, and plants and other things use these pathways, right? This is a conserved pathway is a pathway that has been saved by evolutionary processes because it's good. There's nothing better than it. And so the most simple organisms do it, the most complex organisms do it because it's a pathway that works. It's a very important idea. Let's look at some practice for this idea here. Practice. Which the following best justifies the claim that energy input is necessary for living organisms in order to maintain order. All right, so before we go down to ABCD, we're going to talk about it. If you want to pause the video, that's fine. Justifies the claim that energy input is necessary. We need energy input in order to continue to keep the coupling going, right? Without that, because energy is lost in every reaction, we need a constant input of energy. So let's go find that in ABCD. Cells require energy to move materials by diffusion. They don't. Diffusion is passive transport. In the absence of constant energy input, molecular disorder increases due to the second law of thermodynamics, leading to system failure. Sounds like something with computers or something, doesn't it? But it's the correct answer. Yeah. There's nothing wrong about that. Let's look at C and D. And I think sometimes it is helpful for you to hear me talk about why something is wrong. Glycolysis is the first energy producing step in all organisms, showing that metabolism is essential for order. That's not necessarily true. And so we don't need that there. And glycolysis is a conserved process. But metabolism creates disorder, and so that's not good. Without ATP synthesis, cells cannot replicate DNA, which shows that energy is needed for growth. Again, this doesn't really answer, and the idea here is we're not looking for something that's true or false necessarily, because these statements aren't necessarily false, but do they justify the claim that energy is necessary for? No, they don't, right? And to maintain order, we need energy because there is disorder being created with everything. In order to maintain order, we need more energy input. That is why B is correct. The other things aren't necessarily true. Well, this is just false, but the other things aren't false. They're just not good in order to answer the claim. I hope this was helpful. 3.4, we're going to be looking at photosynthesis. 3.5, cellular respiration. I'm going to be separating those two lectures into 2 videos. Stick around.